Imagine for a moment that the entire story of your life has already been written not by fate, but by the deepest truth within you. Not in the pages of some distant future, but coded into the very center of your being, like a golden thread you've been following since before you were born. The path isn't being formed as you go. It's being remembered, called forth from a place beyond fear, beyond striving, beyond lack. As Emmet Fox once taught, there is no such thing as undemonstrated understanding. What you truly grasp deep in the mind, anchored in feeling, must eventually appear. So before we journey inward, I invite you to like and subscribe, but only if it truly resonates with your soul. The end you dream of is not far. It's not behind a wall of waiting or earned through perfection. It is a state of consciousness, accessible now, disguised as a longing you keep thinking is incomplete. But the longing itself is proof it echoes from something already accomplished, something your inner self remembers even as your surface self tries to understand. The spiritual path doesn't begin by chasing better circumstances. It begins by daring to believe that the better version already exists, and your only task is to align. You've been taught to think in timelines: if this, then that. When this happens, I will feel peace. But time is not the ruler of truth. It is a measurement of events, not of essence. And your essence is the end. The final form you think you're pursuing is already present in seed form. What you've called the future isn't a place you're going, it's a vibration you're either allowing or resisting in each present moment. Most people confuse movement with progress. They pile on actions, strategies, and affirmations, thinking they'll force their way into a new reality. But you know better. You've started to feel it already, that quiet sense that maybe the truest shift doesn't come from doing more, but from being different. When your inner position changes, everything else bends to meet it. This isn't passive. This is the fiercest kind of transformation, the kind that demands inner integrity long before the outer results show up. You will feel tension in this process. That's natural. Tension is the pull between what you've been taught and what your spirit already knows. You've been told to be realistic, to manage expectations, to only believe what you can measure. But your soul operates on a different system. It doesn't wait for evidence, it creates it. When you align with the end, you become the evidence. There will be moments when your senses tell you the opposite. When the bank account looks thin, the relationship feels distant, the opportunity hasn't come. That's where most people retreat. But this is your invitation to stay, to remain mentally in the end even when the facts don't support it. That isn't delusion. That's faith of the highest order, the kind that builds bridges between worlds. Staying in the end is not about pretending nothing hurts. It's not about ignoring reality. It's about knowing which reality you serve. Pain may visit, fear may knock, but they are not landlords. They do not own the space unless you hand them the keys. When you dwell in the end, you take full ownership of your mind's terrain. You stop letting circumstances dictate your identity. You start choosing who you are before the evidence shows up. This is not easy, but it is simple. The simplicity lies in choice. Will you rehearse the old or embody the new? Will you define yourself by history or by destiny? The new is not just an improvement of the old, it's a different frequency entirely. You can't sneak into it while clinging to old beliefs. You have to let them break. The break will come gently, or with fire, but it will come. Something in you is already breaking now, not in despair, but in release. The heavy layers of proving, of performing, of waiting to be chosen, they're falling away. And in their place comes clarity. You were never meant to seek permission for your becoming. You were meant to remember the version of you that never needed it. When you understand that the end is already written, everything changes. You stop trying to force life into form. You stop grasping at signs to feel safe. You stop begging reality to cooperate. Instead, you start cooperating with the version of you that already exists in the fullness of completion. That version doesn't need proof. It radiates knowing. And from that knowing, the world adjusts not because you chased it, but because you became the kind of presence it cannot ignore. This is where your story truly begins, not with striving, but with remembering. not with lack, but with alignment. You are not chasing a dream. You are collapsing the distance between your current self and the truth that was always there. That truth is not soft, it's not sentimental, it's strong, exact, and ready. And as we move forward, you'll feel it rise. You'll feel it sink into the cracks where doubt used to live. You'll feel the release of false timelines, and in that space, something ancient and undeniable will take root. Now we move forward, not to seek, but to dwell. You are not merely reacting to a world outside of you. You are shaping it through the unseen field of your own mind. Everything you call reality, every opportunity, setback, or turning point, first passed through the invisible corridor of thought, feeling, and belief. The world is not happening to you. It is moving through you, echoing back what you have accepted as true. This is not a metaphor. It is the structure of reality. The outer world is a delayed report of your inner assumptions. Mind is the first world, not body, not behavior, not even intention. Before anything becomes tangible, it is formed in the silence of thought and the current of feeling. You don't change life by wrestling with its pieces. You change it by returning to the blueprint, the thought patterns that silently instruct life on what to reflect. This truth is confronting because it removes excuses. If the world begins in your mind, then no external force has final say, not the economy, not the past, not even the actions of others. You are not immune to challenge, but you are never powerless. And this, perhaps more than anything, is what the soul longs to remember, that it is not a victim of randomness, but a co-creator within a lawful, intelligent field. You've spent years giving energy to things you thought were fixed, roles, identities, social conditions. But once you grasp that mind is the first world, those structures start to dissolve. You begin to see how often you handed your authorship over to circumstance. You believed the job had to come first before you felt worthy. You thought the relationship had to stabilize before you felt secure. But it was always the other way around. The world doesn't confirm your worth, it responds to it. And that response is shaped not by shallow affirmations, but by your sustained inner environment. The universe reads consistency. It recognizes patterns. If you say one thing and feel another, it listens to the feeling. If you beg for change but anchor yourself in fear, it reflects the anchor. This isn't punishment, it's precision. So, you must ask yourself, not with judgment, but with deep honesty, what kind of messages are you constantly transmitting through your thoughts? What is the tone of your inner voice when no one else is around? Is it aligned with the reality you claim to desire, or does it still vibrate at the frequency of the old? This is where spiritual maturity begins, not in mystical insight, but in mental discipline. You don't need to control every thought, but you do need to take responsibility for the dominant ones, the ones you rehearse, defend, and believe without question. These are the thoughts that shape the architecture of your reality. And it's here, in the unseen realm of mind, that the most potent shifts occur. There's no need to wait for proof before aligning with your new state. In fact, if you wait for proof, you're confirming doubt. You're saying, I don't believe it until I see it, which is the exact opposite of the principle. Instead, you become the one who says, I see it because I believe it, not blindly, not naively, but with full awareness that belief is causative, not reactive. This understanding changes how you move through the world. Instead of asking, what do I need to do to get there? You begin asking, what kind of inner world would make that outcome inevitable? The emphasis shifts from doing to being, from action to alignment. And in that shift, effort becomes elegant. Action flows from inspiration, not anxiety. This doesn't mean you stop working. It means your work becomes guided by inner clarity, not outer noise. It means your steps carry weight because they originate from the version of you who already knows how this ends. When mind is your starting point, movement becomes meaningful. You are no longer running to escape lack. You are walking as one who already possesses the fullness of what you seek. There will still be moments of doubt. That's expected. But when you catch yourself slipping into fear, you'll remember this foundation. Nothing changes until the mind changes first. The outer can shift only as far as the inner permits. So you come back not in guilt, but in grace. You redirect the thought, you stabilize the emotion, you realign. And slowly, the old world stops calling your name. Its urgency fades. Its threats lose weight, because you're not anchored there anymore. You've begun to live in the real world, the one formed, not by reaction, but by recognition. Recognition that what's inside you is not some vague potential, but the source itself. You are not just thinking thoughts. You are building futures. You are not just managing emotions. You are sculpting form. The invisible realm is not a dream, it is the template. Every outer manifestation is simply a delayed mirror, and the reflection sharpens in proportion to your clarity. So pause not to disconnect, but to deepen. Not to escape, but to remember. Remember that the world you're longing for doesn't begin at your doorstep. It begins at the level of your self-concept. Shift that, and everything else follows. This is not theory. This is law. And once you learn to honor the mind as your first world, you will never beg the outer world for permission again. The moment a desire rises within you, it's not a fabrication. It's not a fantasy you invented out of emptiness. It is a seed planted not from outside influence, but from a deeper recognition of what already belongs to you. That desire isn't asking for permission to be possible. It's echoing something your soul already knows is true. Desire at its core is a form of memory, not from your past, but from your potential. The future version of you, the one living in the end, sends ripples back through time, and those ripples arrive as longing, as inspiration, as the unshakable feeling that more is available. You don't desire randomly. You don't crave what has no correspondence within your inner blueprint. That inner pull is intelligence. It's guidance. And your job is not to doubt it. It's to listen and align. A seed doesn't apologize for wanting to become a tree. It doesn't question whether it's allowed to grow or if the forest will approve. It simply carries its design forward, without fear, because it understands that the pattern is already present. What it must do is yield to the process, not resist it with questions about timing or proof. But unlike the seed, you've been conditioned to hesitate. You've been taught to treat desire as indulgence, or to require evidence before trusting what arises in your heart. You've learned to file your dreams under someday and to focus on survival rather than expansion. This is not your fault, but it is your responsibility to unlearn. Because when you hesitate, when you question your own yearning, you begin to build false stories around it. You begin to add conditions. I'll allow myself to believe this if I see a sign. Or, maybe this dream was meant for someone else. And slowly, the memory dims. The signal weakens. The seed waits. Yet the truth remains. You were not meant to carry longing as a weight. You were meant to follow it as a compass. That internal spark, that flash of vision, that surge of wanting is your most accurate direction finder. Not the external circumstances, not the voices that urge caution, not the rules designed for smaller lives. Your desire is not a distraction from your purpose, it is the delivery mechanism of your purpose. But here's the difference between wishful thinking and spiritual certainty. The latter assumes that the end already exists. It doesn't hope it remembers. It doesn't beg it aligns. When you dwell in the end, your desire isn't something far away. It's something you're already in relationship with. You begin to walk as though the outcome is inevitable, not because you're pretending, but because you've aligned yourself with the truth of completion. And that alignment isn't loud. It's not made of constant declarations. It's subtle. It's stable. It's a knowing that becomes the background of every choice you make. You move differently when you're remembering instead of reaching. You speak with a different tone. You take actions not to create the end, but to match it. Your life becomes a mirror held up to the version of you that already is. Still, there will be moments when the outer world disagrees. You may look around and see no signs of the harvest. You may feel like nothing is moving, like everything is still under the soil. And that's when the deeper question arises: will you trust the seed, even in silence? This is the rise of spiritual maturity, to stand in the absence of evidence and still know that the design is intact. You don't ask the seed to hurry. You water it. You let the sun reach it. You clear the weeds. But you never confuse visibility with viability. The dream is growing even when unseen. This is not a passive stance. It is an active choice to root yourself in faith. Not the kind that blindly hopes, but the kind that understands structure. Reality follows mind. Time follows belief. What you believe consistently is not just a mental idea, it's a spiritual directive. It informs the universal law: what to assemble, where to deliver, and when to make it visible. So take a breath, not to pause, but to receive. Receive the truth that you are not generating your dreams. You are tuning into them. You are not building your future from scratch. You are aligning with something that already exists in full pattern, waiting for your steady recognition. When you stop treating your desire as a request and start treating it as a retrieval, the whole landscape changes. You begin to relax not into laziness, but into congruence. Your actions stop being attempts to force and become movements of confirmation. You walk like someone who has already been chosen, because you have. And if you ever forget, if doubt creeps in, if the silence gets heavy, remember this: your desire is not a test, it is a transmission. And you don't need to pass anything to receive it. You need only to dwell in the knowing that it was never foreign to you. You're not chasing something outside. You're returning to something within. That return is the beginning of power, because once you start walking from the end instead of toward it, life doesn't have to convince you anymore. You've become the evidence. The seed has awakened. And the harvest is inevitable, not someday, but now, unfolding step by step through the mind that finally said yes. You may have glimpsed it already, that strange and powerful truth that what you feel most consistently has a way of showing up around you. Not because emotion is mystical, but because it is magnetic. Emotion isn't decoration, it's directive. It tells the universe where to go, how fast to move, and in what form to appear. More than thought alone, emotion charges your internal blueprint with the weight of belief. This is why it matters how you feel. Not as a judgment, but as a form of authorship. You're not punished for negative emotion, but you are shaped by it. Every repeated feeling reinforces a signal, and that signal becomes your atmosphere, your tone, your frequency. You walk into rooms with it, you speak relationships into it, you invite results through it. Emotion is not reaction, it is participation. To dwell in the end, you must not only think from it, you must feel from it, not momentarily, not theatrically, but steadily. As Emmet Fox understood, emotion is not to be feared, it is to be mastered. Not by suppression, but by refinement. Because whatever you repeatedly feel becomes familiar, and what is familiar becomes home. If you want a different life, you don't just change your thoughts, you change your emotional address. But this shift requires honesty. You cannot fake emotion to the universe. You might repeat affirmations for hours, but if your body is anchored in fear, doubt will override the message. The law listens to your dominant state, not your surface rituals. The invitation, then, is not to perform new feelings, but to develop a relationship with them. To ask, what does fulfillment actually feel like in my body? What does peace taste like in my nervous system? What would it be like to get so emotionally acquainted with the end result that it feels more real than your current conditions? Most people try to feel differently after circumstances change. You must learn to feel differently before they do. That is what gives you authority. Emotion is not a side effect of results. It is a tool to create them. You don't wait to be inspired. You become emotionally congruent with inspiration. You don't wait to feel secure. You anchor safety internally and watch the outer begin to mirror it. But this requires you to break the habit of emotional dependency. You've been taught that your feelings are dictated by what happens around you. But that's not law, that's programming. The real shift happens when you realize you can select emotion, the way you select focus, the way you select clothing. It takes training, it takes awareness, but it is possible. And more than possible, it's essential. Because until you take charge of your emotional tone, your creative power remains scattered. Your mind may want one thing, but if your emotions are rehearsing rejection, delay, or unworthiness, the signal gets split. The law does not respond to your preferences, it responds to your permission. And permission is granted through emotion. There's no need to fear this. Emotional mastery doesn't mean constant bliss. It means inner steadiness. It means recognizing when you're drifting and choosing to return not because you're trying to control results, but because you value alignment. You begin to notice, how do I feel after I dwell on this thought? How do I move after I bathe in this emotion? You study yourself not to criticize, but to calibrate. Eventually, you'll come to see that emotion is not just energy, it is the language of creation. Every fulfilled life carries a specific emotional rhythm, and to step into that life, you must become fluent in its frequency. You begin feeling now what you once postponed for after. You allow joy before the goal. You claim confidence before the audience. You let gratitude arrive before the manifestation, and not out of superstition, but out of understanding. Because you've walked this enough to know, the universe is not withholding anything from you. It's mirroring your most repeated emotional signal. When you live in the energy of completion, you draw experiences that affirm completion. When you embody the feeling of trust, you stop leaking energy into fear. And when you stabilize in the emotional tone of the life you've chosen, everything else begins to bend toward you, not because you chased it, but because you finally matched it. This is why feelings matter, not because they're soft, not because they're poetic, but because they are structural. They form the bridge between unseen belief and seen reality. And that bridge will either be solid or shaky depending on how consistently you tend to it. So let this be your turning point, not a dramatic breakthrough, but a quiet commitment. To stop waiting for the world to change before you feel the feeling, and to begin generating the inner state that your chosen life already lives in. You're not manipulating, you're not pretending, you're harmonizing. And in that harmony, the fog clears. The contradictions dissolve. You no longer carry opposing frequencies in the same breath. You no longer pray for abundance while emotionally affirming lack. You choose your center. You dwell there. You let it grow roots. And from those roots, the form takes shape. That shape may come slowly, or it may rush in. But either way, you'll recognize it not because it's flashy, but because it's familiar. You felt it long before it arrived. You built your life around the frequency. And now, it has no choice but to meet you. There is a quiet lie that lives beneath the surface of most spiritual delay. The belief that time is required for transformation. That if you wait long enough, say the right things enough times, do all the right rituals in just the right order, something will finally shift. But waiting is not faith. It's often disguised doubt. And the more you rehearse the identity of not yet, the more firmly you embed yourself in a state that guarantees more waiting. This doesn't mean you force outcomes. It means you stop bowing to delay as if it's sacred. You stop worshiping the someday. Because every time you emotionally accept that something must come later, you are affirming its absence now. And what you affirm repeatedly through emotion, focus, tone, becomes a structure your life must obey. You may think you're being patient, being wise, even being spiritual. But often, what looks like patience is simply deferral masked as virtue. The world has trained you to make peace with postponement, to live inside gaps, to expect dreams to take forever. And if you agree with that frame, it becomes your atmosphere. It becomes normal to you. It becomes a law in your personal universe, not because it's universal truth, but because you keep emotionally signing the contract. But what if the real shift doesn't require time? What if it requires permission? Your permission to step into the result now, not by achieving it in form, but by inhabiting it in essence. That is what it means to dwell in the end. It's not a game of patience. It's a stance of immediacy. The end is not far off. It is here, as soon as you're willing to take mental and emotional residence in it. There's a reason Neville Goddard emphasized living from the end instead of thinking of the end. The difference is monumental. Thinking of the end keeps it at a distance. It becomes an idea you visit occasionally, a hope you keep warm. But living from the end demands embodiment. It asks you to let go of the identity that still believes it's not here. It pulls you out of negotiation and into decision. To dwell in the end means you stop seeking constant reassurance. You don't keep checking the mirror for signs that your inner work is working. You move in the knowing that it already has. You stop asking, "When will it come?" and start behaving like someone who knows it already has. You act, speak, and rest from completion, not anticipation. This is not delusion. It is dominion. It is claiming responsibility for your state not as a coping mechanism, but as creative alignment. You are not pretending you've arrived. You are dissolving the emotional agreement with the idea that you haven't. And this is where most falter, not because they don't believe in the law, but because they haven't made peace with immediacy. They still think there's virtue in delay. They still think they're unworthy of receiving without suffering first. So they create elaborate emotional staircases. "I'll feel deserving after I fix this," or "I'll let it come after I prove I'm ready." But none of that is real. It's a trick of ego wearing the mask of humility. The truth is more direct and more confronting. Are you willing to stop waiting and begin dwelling? Are you willing to drop the storyline that says time must pass before alignment is valid? Are you ready to treat the end not as a future point on the map, but as a current state you step into now? This doesn't mean you ignore process. It means you stop giving power to delay. You take action, yes, but not from lack. You move from the end, not toward it. You let each step arise from the version of you who already knows the outcome, and because of that, your steps are lighter. Your words carry clarity. Your choices lose their tension. You are no longer trying to earn your reality, you are embodying it. Of course, the world around you may still appear unchanged. But you'll know the truth beneath appearances. You'll feel the inner shift, the crack in the old identity, the loosening of the delay narrative. You'll recognize that you're no longer hoping, no longer bargaining. You've moved in. You've changed addresses from waiting to dwelling, from seeking to being. And from that shift, life starts responding differently. People talk to you differently. Opportunities arrange themselves without force. You'll find yourself saying things you used to rehearse, except now they come out effortlessly. Why? Because you're not affirming a wish, you're confirming a state. This is the threshold of power. When you no longer need the future to validate the present, you've chosen now as the location of truth, and because of that, delay loses its grip. The not yet dissolves. The waiting room becomes the living room, and the version of you who was always whole finally gets to speak. That voice has been with you the entire time, just waiting for permission to lead. There's a shift that occurs the moment you stop trying to become the person who has the life you desire and instead start being them. Not rehearsing, not visualizing them from a distance, but stepping directly into their posture, their tone, their decisions. It's not about faking it. It's about choosing to collapse the space between who you've been and who you already are at the highest level. This is what it means to dwell in the end. Not merely to think or feel differently, but to walk into the room as the version of yourself who no longer wonders when it will happen, because for them, it already has. That version doesn't chase evidence. They carry presence. They don't need to repeat affirmations to prove it to themselves. Their state speaks louder than their words. When you step into the role now, without hesitation or compromise, something fundamental shifts. You stop asking life for confirmation. You stop trying to convince anyone, including yourself, that you're worthy of the outcome. You become someone for whom the outcome is simply natural. Not because you manipulated anything, but because you finally dropped the behaviors that belong to the version of you who didn't know. There is no becoming in the spiritual sense. Becoming implies distance. It suggests that who you are now is lacking and must be upgraded. But the deepest transformations come not from upgrades, but from unveiling. The truth was always in you. The role is not something to earn, it's something to claim. That doesn't mean you won't feel resistance. Resistance is part of it. It shows you where the old identity still clings. Every time you make a choice that reflects the end, and the fear rises, what if I'm wrong? What if this doesn't work? You are confronting the edge of the old self, but you don't fight it. You don't retreat. You stay. You respond like someone who has already crossed over. Because you are not rehearsing confidence. You are not simulating power. You are remembering. And memory is stronger than imagination. The more you embody the end, the more familiar it becomes. Not because the outer world has changed, but because you have. You no longer look to form to prove your identity. You let identity generate form. You begin to notice the subtle ways you used to dim yourself, holding back truth to seem agreeable, second-guessing instincts to avoid judgment, lowering expectations to avoid disappointment. But the version of you who dwells in the end doesn't do that. They speak clearly. They choose decisively. They don't waste time managing perceptions because they're not living to be accepted. They're living to be aligned. This isn't arrogance. This is responsibility. You are taking ownership of your state not because you're desperate for control, but because you finally understand how power actually works. Power doesn't arrive through external permission. It rises when you act like someone who no longer waits to be chosen. You might lose things in this shift. People may not understand the new tone you carry. Some relationships were built on your indecision. Some patterns depended on your old limitations. When you step out of that structure, the pieces that fit the old you may fall away. But let them. What belongs to the version of you who dwells in the end will not require shrinking. This isn't about pretending you're better than where you came from. It's about refusing to pretend you're still there. And once you realize that, you'll stop negotiating with the past. You'll stop justifying why you're ready. You'll stop proving your worth through effort and simply choose to live from it. Every choice you make now becomes part of that embodiment. What you tolerate, how you speak to yourself, what you allow into your space. These aren't neutral, they're all casting votes for which version of you gets to lead. So choose with precision. Choose with memory. Choose like someone who's already there. And that's the secret. You don't need to build a bridge to the end. You are the bridge. Your being is the path. Your tone is the permission slip. When you move as the one who already knows, life stops feeling like a test and starts behaving like a mirror. This isn't passive. It's the most active spiritual posture there is, because it demands consistency, not performance. It requires you to walk into situations that don't yet reflect your inner state and hold that state anyway. You don't shrink when reality wobbles. You don't collapse because conditions haven't caught up. You remain. You embody. You stabilize. And as you do, the atmosphere bends. The tension shifts. Not because you forced anything, but because you stopped fracturing yourself between timelines. You stopped splitting energy between who you are and who you're trying to become. You chose, once and for all, to move as the one. And now, the world has no choice but to reflect the one you've become. There is a misunderstanding that runs deep, even among the most sincere seekers, the belief that if something can't be seen, it must not be real. That if it isn't obvious to the senses, it must only be theoretical. But invisibility is not the same as absence. Just because you can't touch it yet, doesn't mean it isn't already structured, alive, waiting. The realm of the unseen is not lesser than the material. It is prior. The visible is only ever the after effect. What you hold in your hands today was once an invisible arrangement of belief, emotion, and identity. What you will hold tomorrow is being shaped now, in the quiet of your inner world, long before it arrives in form. And that inner world, if misunderstood, is where most people abandon their power. You've been conditioned to trust what can be measured, to look for signs, seek proof, validate progress. But the moment you insist on seeing something before believing it, you reverse the law. You declare that form must lead and spirit must follow. And in doing so, you bind yourself to delay, not because it's required, but because it's the only timeline your current state allows. You don't need to wait for visibility to trust the reality of the end. The blueprint exists, even when the house is not yet built. The seed holds the tree, even when the ground is quiet. You are not making something happen. You are allowing something already structured to unfold. The question is not whether it's real. The question is whether you are willing to match it before it becomes visible. This is the sacred power of faith, not as superstition, but as function. Faith is not hoping something might be real. Faith is behaving in alignment with what is already real but not yet seen. And when you live this way, the world begins to respond in rhythm with you, not ahead of you. You're no longer chasing signs. You are generating alignment. And yet, this requires stamina, not physical, but spiritual. You must be able to walk through the in-between without leaking belief. You must learn to hold inner form, even when the outer hasn't caught up. Because if you allow every passing contradiction to shake your state, you end up restarting the process over and over again. Not because the law failed, but because you stepped out of resonance. Invisible doesn't mean weak, it means foundational. Your inner atmosphere, how you carry yourself in the absence of proof, is the real material of transformation. That's why your tone matters more than your words. That's why your posture matters more than your performance. You are always broadcasting something, even when you're still. The world may not see it, but your field is already registering it. Life doesn't respond to what you beg for. It responds to what you normalize. And normalization happens in silence, in stillness. In the way you get out of bed. In the way you say no to things that don't match your future. In the way you stand, breathe, move, decide as though the unseen were already fully formed. And eventually, it will be. Not because you forced it, but because you stabilized in it long enough for it to come into view. The people around you may question you. They might not understand how you're moving. They might even say you've changed. But of course you have. That was the point. You're no longer operating at the level of explanation. You're not trying to convince anyone of your future. You're living from it. That's how you know the shift is real, not when it shows up in your bank account or your relationship or your career, but when it becomes normal to behave as though it already has. The anxiety disappears. The urgency fades. The clinging drops away. You're not forcing belief anymore. You're dwelling inside it. And the remarkable part? That's when the world starts catching up. Not because you finally earned it, but because you finally stopped delaying it with doubt. The delay was never in the blueprint. It was in the misalignment between what you knew deep down and what you performed on the surface. Now, that gap is closing. Now the invisible feels more real than the noise. You don't need anyone to see it yet because you've seen it. You've walked in it. You've spoken from it. And when you do that long enough, life stops questioning you and starts rearranging around you. So hold the pattern. Stay with the tone. Be loyal to the invisible, not because it's comfortable, but because it's true. Let others measure progress by what they can see. You're building from a deeper metric now, one that starts not with form but with frequency. Because what's invisible to the world is already real in you. There are moments when life seems to say no. The door doesn't open. The call doesn't come. The outcome collapses before it even takes shape. And in those moments, your first instinct may be to recoil, to question your alignment, to doubt the law, to assume that rejection means something's broken in you. But rejection, when seen from the higher vantage point, is rarely denial. It is redirection. It is refinement. It is intelligence clearing the path for what truly matches the frequency you've chosen. And if you rush to interpret every closed door as failure, you miss the deeper function of the process. You misread the signals. You panic where you were meant to align. When you dwell in the end, you stop measuring progress by surface-level responses. You no longer give ultimate authority to timing, to temporary silence, or to the reactions of others. You understand that appearances lie, that just because something looks like a detour doesn't mean it is. Sometimes, what you call a setback is simply life protecting the integrity of your chosen state, filtering out everything that no longer fits. This is why spiritual grounding is essential. Without it, you'll react to every bump as a sign that you're off course. But with it, you learn to hold still, not in passivity, but in clarity. You stop reaching for comfort through signs. You don't need reality to nod in your direction every 5 minutes. You move forward with the quiet confidence of one who knows nothing true is ever withheld. And what does not align must dissolve not as punishment but as preparation. When something falls away, your ego may feel the sting, but your spirit, if you're listening, will recognize the clearing. You'll feel it like air returning to a crowded room, like a pattern breaking. And though part of you may grieve what didn't unfold, a deeper part of you will start to breathe again because the field is being made ready. It's not personal, it's precision. You may think that delay is the universe ignoring you. In truth, it's often the universe giving you time to shed the parts of you that still carry contradiction. You can't bring ambivalence into a state of completion. You can't dwell in the end while simultaneously making emotional space for the "what if it doesn't work" version. One must go. And sometimes, rejection is the tool that helps you decide. So when something doesn't move, don't assume it means the process has failed. Ask instead, is this a filter? Is this refinement? Is this the end, rejecting a piece of the old self I hadn't noticed was still attached? Because here's the deeper truth. Once you commit to living from the end, life becomes intelligent in a new way. It begins reshaping your environment, your relationships, your habits, not just to deliver what you want, but to preserve the state you've chosen. If something doesn't belong to the vibration of the end, it will get uncomfortable. It will collapse. It will exit. And that's not a problem. That's proof. But only if you don't flinch. Only if you stay. Because when you do, you get stronger. Your signal gets cleaner. Your center holds without needing validation. You stop swinging between excitement and fear based on feedback. You become the stable presence that reality learns to trust. And over time, something beautiful happens. You stop being reactive. You stop asking, "Why didn't that work?" and start declaring, "Whatever falls away is not required for where I'm going." You don't shrink your state to match temporary outcomes. You let the temporary bend to the eternal. You move not from fear of missing out, but from the fullness of already being aligned. This doesn't mean everything will unfold without friction. It means that friction no longer disorients you. You don't waste energy trying to force-fit what isn't right. You don't argue with what's leaving. You let the door close, not in defeat, but in dignity. Because you've seen the end. You've walked it in your mind. You've felt it in your body. And anything that contradicts it, no matter how shiny or familiar, must be released. Not because you're ungrateful, but because you're unavailable for anything less than resonance. This is not about perfection. It's about precision, about recognizing that rejection is often correction, that when you don't cling, you're free to receive what's actually yours, that when you stop interpreting every silence as a failure, you start hearing the deeper messages that can only be spoken in stillness. And most of all, you begin to trust not just the process, but yourself within it. You realize that even when life says no, you are not being turned away. You are being tuned up. And with every release, you get clearer, stronger, more anchored, in the version of yourself that no longer negotiates with doubt. Rejection may visit, but it never defines, unless you let it. And you won't, not anymore. Because now you recognize the signal, and you know how to stay in the end even when everything else tries to pull you back. There is a subtle but critical distinction between chasing and dwelling, and it defines the entire trajectory of your transformation. Chasing is what happens when you treat your desired reality as something outside of you, something to pursue, reach for, or eventually catch. It keeps you in constant movement, exhausting your energy in service of an identity you haven't yet claimed. Dwelling, on the other hand, is a stillness within motion. It doesn't mean inaction. It means presence. It means you are no longer running toward the future. You are living from it. There is no grasping, no stretching, no emotional strain. You are not chasing the thing. You are becoming the one who no longer needs to. This shift might sound subtle, but it alters everything. In the chasing mindset, every step is laced with doubt. You act from absence. You move from lack. You wake up rehearsing strategies and fall asleep reviewing what's still missing. The chase, even when masked as ambition or motivation, carries the scent of insufficiency. And that signal delays your arrival not because the dream is far away, but because you've positioned yourself outside of it. When you dwell, the energy is completely different. You don't move less, you move differently. You're no longer trying to get the result, you're confirming it. Every step becomes a form of agreement with the end. Every decision says, "This is already mine," instead of, "How do I make this real?" Your frequency stabilizes, your nervous system quiets. And instead of frantic manifestation rituals, you begin living a life that feels inevitable. This is the posture of power, not passivity, but poise. Chasing is unstable by nature. Dwelling is rooted. And when you root into the version of yourself who already lives in the fulfilled state, you stop asking life to hurry up. You stop micromanaging outcomes. You walk through your day with a calm certainty that cannot be faked, because it doesn't come from wishing, it comes from knowing. This doesn't mean you won't be tested. The world will still offer you bait urgency, comparison, unmet timelines. You'll be tempted to chase again, to fix, to hustle, to beg for validation. But that's where your training shows. You'll remember that the one who chases is always a few steps behind, while the one who dwells is already home. And make no mistake, dwelling is not lazy. It takes more spiritual strength to hold the state than to chase the form. To sit in the seat of your chosen identity even while results are still catching up requires inner discipline. But it is that discipline that generates the shift, not the action alone, the source of the action. When you move from the chase, your energy burns out fast. You overthink. You say yes to things that dilute your focus. You tolerate versions of reality that don't match your blueprint because you're afraid the real thing won't arrive. But when you dwell, your boundaries sharpen. Your yes becomes clearer. Your no becomes effortless. You act only from resonance, not fear. This is what allows the outer world to catch up. Not because you bullied it into submission, but because you stopped arguing with your own state. You stopped interrupting the process with insecurity. You stayed still, not in stagnation, but in alignment. Imagine walking into a space with the certainty that you belong there, not because someone said so, but because your presence carries the tone of belonging. That's the power of dwelling. You aren't asking for the result to accept you. You are shaping the space to reflect you. You will still move. You will still build. You will still speak and stretch and grow. But none of it will be from fear. You will not be trying to earn the outcome. You will be living as someone who already has, and that frequency is impossible to ignore. Not because it's loud, but because it's true. So let go of the chase, not because your desire is wrong, but because it's already done. The more you chase, the more you affirm distance. But when you dwell, you collapse that distance into now. This is the way you make your inner world the command center. This is how form follows function, emotion follows decision, and the outer bends not to your hustle, but to your home frequency. Chasing is always a conversation with absence. Dwelling is a conversation with truth. And you are no longer a seeker, you're an anchor. You've stopped running after. You've started living from. You've heard the phrase before, feel it real. But this isn't about performance. It's not about dramatizing emotion or forcing an imagined high. It's about anchoring into something deeper than thought, into the inner state where fulfillment has already occurred. The end isn't just an image, it's a frequency. And when you dwell in that frequency long enough, you stop trying to receive the thing and start living as the one who already has. This is the essence of spiritual embodiment. You're not visualizing an outcome as a hopeful fantasy. You're stepping into the emotional texture of what it means to already be living it. This is not about creating fake excitement. That can be just as dishonest as despair. What you're looking for is resonance, emotional honesty with your highest self. The subtle but unmistakable sense that this is mine, even if no one else can see it yet. Your real home is not a building. It's not a location. It's not even a specific lifestyle. Your home is the inner state of knowing. the feeling of fulfilled presence. That state has always been your origin and your return. And the work isn't to get to it, it's to remember it, to return to it, to make it the baseline from which everything else proceeds. But here's where it becomes practical. If you want to change your life, change your home frequency. You don't need to control every detail. You don't need to micromanage the how. You simply need to make fulfillment familiar. That means spending more time in that emotional space than in the emotion of lack. It means catching yourself when you drift into old tones, urgency, self-pity, performance, and gently returning, not with force, not with shame, just with presence. And yes, at first, it will feel unfamiliar. It might even feel like a lie. That's okay. Every new state feels strange before it feels safe. Your nervous system may resist. Your mind may argue. But if you stay long enough, something miraculous begins to happen. The state stabilizes. It becomes normal. Not flashy, not euphoric, just yours. This is how fulfillment begins, not with outer results, but with inner repetition. You make the state so emotionally known that anything less starts to feel foreign. And from that familiarity, action becomes different. You're not acting to escape where you are. You're acting in congruence with where you already live. You write the email, make the move, speak the truth not to force a result, but to reflect a reality you've already accepted. This is the emotional threshold most people never cross. They visualize, they affirm, they act, but underneath it all, they still feel like the same person who doesn't have it yet. And that incongruence is what blocks the arrival. Not because they're wrong, but because they haven't shifted homes. If your emotions are still rehearsing the life you're trying to escape, no amount of strategy will override that signal. You must choose the tone of fulfillment and make it your atmosphere. And the way you do that is simple but not easy. You return to it every time you drift, not to chase the feeling, but to become the one who never left. That's what makes the difference. Most people visit fulfillment like a vacation, short bursts of feeling good, hoping it'll carry them through. But dwelling means you live there. You make decisions from there. You say no to things that don't belong there. You build habits that reflect that frequency, not out of discipline alone, but because your identity has shifted. And in that shift, life reorganizes. Circumstances begin to look for ways to match the tone you've chosen. People respond differently. Opportunities take new shapes. Not because the world has changed, but because your anchor has moved. You are no longer someone reaching for peace. You are peace, expressing itself. You're no longer seeking abundance. You are dwelling in the inner climate that abundance naturally surrounds. You don't have to prove you deserve it. You have to stop denying that you already do. This is where the transformation becomes sustainable, not through force, but through familiarity. You've tasted the frequency. Now you choose to live there. You may still feel the pull of the old tone, especially in moments of challenge or doubt. But those moments are invitations, not interruptions. They remind you to come home. And each time you return, the foundation gets stronger. The feeling of fulfillment becomes less of a performance and more of a posture. You begin to carry it without effort. You begin to trust it without evidence. And when that happens, life no longer feels like a waiting game. It feels like alignment in motion. This is what it means to dwell in the end, not to visit, not to wish, but to return to your emotional home and claim it as the most honest thing about you. There's a point you reach when the old life simply doesn't fit anymore. Not because it was terrible, not because it failed you, but because your inner state no longer agrees with it. You've seen too much. You've remembered too much. You've felt the weight and rhythm of the version of you that dwells in the end, and now anything outside of that feels like compromise. This is where many hesitate. They try to keep one foot in the new identity while holding on to the safety of the old habits, backup plans, and fallback personas. But spiritual transformation doesn't work like that. You cannot anchor into a new state while still negotiating with the version of you who doubts it. The end doesn't accept partial residence. It requires full commitment. Burning the backup plan isn't about recklessness. It's about energetic integrity. You don't destroy options to prove something. You release them because they no longer represent who you are. The moment you create a just-in-case path, you split your signal. You say to life, "I'm moving forward, but not if it gets too uncomfortable." And that contradiction confuses the very structure you're trying to build. This doesn't mean you throw away responsibility. It means you stop emotionally investing in outcomes that belong to a former self. You stop giving energy to identities that were born from survival, fear, or self-doubt. You stop feeding the loop that says, "Maybe I should have a backup in case the end doesn't arrive." That loop is the very thing delaying it. You may have learned to be cautious. Maybe you were taught to never fully believe in anything until it was guaranteed. But guarantees don't lead to miracles. Alignment does. And the more you hedge your belief, the more conditional your transformation becomes. You cannot prepare for arrival while rehearsing exit strategies. Burning the backup plan is not just about removing distractions, it's about deciding which version of yourself you are loyal to. Because at some point, you must choose. Are you committed to your becoming, or are you still entertaining the idea that it might not work? This is where clarity emerges, not from more thinking, but from letting go. You release the options that contradict your chosen end, not because they're evil or wrong, but because they carry a frequency that no longer fits. And the moment you do, something opens. Your energy, once divided, becomes whole. Your decisions sharpen. Your tone changes. You walk into situations differently, not looking for reassurance, but radiating certainty. People around you may question it. They might say, "You're being too extreme, too risky." That's fine. They don't feel what you feel. They haven't been where you've gone internally. You don't owe anyone a dissertation on why you're no longer entertaining old options. The integrity of your state speaks louder than explanation. You will be tempted, in moments of uncertainty, to reach back, especially when the new state hasn't fully materialized in form yet. But you must remember what looks like safety in the old world is actually a trap. It seduces you with the illusion of control, while quietly keeping you in a state of waiting. Every time you choose to reinforce a fallback, you signal to the universe that you don't trust the forward. Let that fall away now, not with drama, not with fire, but with finality. Close the mental tabs that keep checking on what you'd do if this doesn't work out. Stop scripting scenes for collapse. You're not playing that role anymore. This is the clean break that initiates deeper congruence. And with it comes a calmness you might not expect, a sense of lightness. Because once you stop managing contradiction, you reclaim power. You become internally unified. Your decisions start flowing from a single place instead of competing narratives. And this unity is magnetic. The law responds quickly to clarity. It's not about how much you want it, it's about how little you contradict it. When your desire and your identity no longer pull against each other, the world around you begins to adjust with speed and precision. So check your field. Are there still emotional contracts you've signed with the past? Are you still giving space to possibilities that reflect a version of you that no longer exists? If so, now is the time. Not to force yourself into anything, but to release what's already expired. You don't have to make a scene. You don't have to prove your commitment through external declarations. You just have to stop offering your energy to what you've outgrown. Let the backup plan dissolve not in resentment, but in recognition. It served its purpose. It brought you this far, but it cannot carry you into the end. Only wholeness can do that. Now you move forward not with hesitation, not with contingency, but with finality. The kind that says, "There is no other life for me than the one I've chosen." Not because it's easy, not because it's guaranteed, but because it's true. And truth is the only plan you need. Visualization is where most people begin. And it's a good place to start. The act of seeing the life you want, of imagining the details with vivid color and emotional weight, it opens the mind to new possibilities. It stretches the inner blueprint. It reminds you that something greater is not only possible but waiting. But visualization alone is not enough. Seeing must become being. And being is stabilized through repetition, embodiment, and emotional alignment, not imagination alone. Many remain stuck in the loop of inspiration. They visualize, they feel the rush, and for a moment they believe. But when the vision fades, when the moment passes and life reasserts itself in familiar forms, they fall back. Not because they're weak, but because they never anchored the end into daily reality. They saw it, but they didn't live from it. This is where stabilization begins. It's the act of becoming emotionally and mentally consistent with the end, regardless of outer fluctuation. It's not about creating a fantasy world to escape into. It's about building an inner reference point so strong that no temporary condition can shake it. That's what it means to dwell in the end, not to fantasize about it, but to normalize it. You stop treating the vision as a mountaintop moment. You make it your baseline. And that's where the real transformation begins. Not in the flash of insight, but in the subtle choices you make every day to act in alignment with that vision. What do you tolerate? What do you speak into existence? What do you entertain mentally when no one's watching? These aren't small things, they're everything. To stabilize means you bring structure to your state. You become someone who doesn't just touch the end during meditation or journaling, but someone who builds a rhythm of behavior, language, and emotional tone around that identity. You move as if. You rest as if. You respond to challenge as if. This isn't faking, it's congruence. It's coherence between who you say you are and what you repeatedly do. Without this coherence, you stay fragmented. You speak abundance while preparing for lack. You claim transformation while hedging with old patterns. And life, always obedient, reflects the inconsistency. Not to punish, but to mirror. You ask for alignment. It shows you where you're not yet aligned. But when you stabilize, life doesn't need to shout anymore. The chaos subsides. You stop swinging between high and low, belief and doubt. You become the calm in the middle of conditions. Not because everything around you is peaceful, but because your state no longer depends on external calm. This is emotional adulthood. You've stopped relying on inspiration alone. You've stopped needing the vision to excite you to believe it. Now, you believe because it's who you are. You don't need the spark anymore, you've built the fire. You maintain it through intention, through repetition, through small, almost invisible choices that reflect a deeper loyalty to the end. And it will feel strange at first. Stabilizing always does, because you're choosing a state before the world gives you full permission to live in it. But that's exactly what gives it power. When you choose to dwell in the end, even while nothing around you has changed, you are proving to yourself that you are no longer governed by circumstance. You are governed by truth. You stop looking for signs to keep going. You become the sign. The way you walk, the tone in your voice, the boundaries you hold, they all speak for the future you've accepted. Not as a hope, as a current address. This doesn't mean you never wobble. Stabilization is not perfection, but it is commitment. It's the willingness to come back to recenter quickly when you drift, to recalibrate when emotion tugs you off course. You forgive yourself faster, you correct yourself sooner. Because the gap between your current reality and your end state is no longer vast. It's a slight pivot, a breath, a reminder. That's the power of practice. At some point, the end becomes your emotional default. The vision becomes your inner climate. And what once felt like imagination starts to feel like memory. You've lived it so thoroughly on the inside that when it shows up on the outside, it won't surprise you. It'll feel like recognition. So yes, visualize. Continue to see clearly. But don't stop there. Build rituals that reflect your identity. Build words that align with your vision. Build relationships that honor your state. This is how the invisible becomes stable. This is how the end arrives, not as a lightning bolt, but as a slow, steady unfolding into what has already been lived. And the best part? You no longer need to wonder if it's working, because you've become the one who doesn't wait to believe. You've stopped asking for confirmation. You've become confirmation itself. Now, the vision doesn't just live in your mind. It lives in your rhythm, your tone, your being. And because of that, it has no choice but to become form. There comes a moment when the old version of you, its strategies, stories, and survival patterns begins to dissolve. Not because you forced it out, but because you no longer agree with it. Something deeper has taken hold. The frequency you've stabilized in begins to reject what doesn't resonate, not as punishment, but as purification. And this is the point where most people feel fear, not because they're wrong, but because they're shedding what once kept them safe. Letting go of the old is not always clean or ceremonial. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's chaotic. Often, it's both. You may find yourself feeling disoriented, even angry. You may mourn versions of yourself you thought you'd always need. But what's really happening is this. Your inner world has evolved, and now it's asking your outer world to catch up. And it will, but not all at once. There will be moments when the old pulls at you, when people, habits, or even thoughts that no longer match your end try to seduce you back into smaller shapes. That's not failure, that's residue. And residue fades when you stop feeding it. You must understand, you are not betraying your past by letting it go. You are honoring the path that brought you here by not needing to stay there. Growth doesn't mean the past was wrong. It means you've completed what it came to teach. Now, you're being asked to release the scaffolding, to leave behind the systems and scripts that once kept you afloat, but now weigh you down. This isn't about erasing your story. It's about reassigning your loyalty. You don't owe your old identity eternal residence just because it carried you through storms. It was a version, not a sentence. And now, the life you've been dwelling in internally needs room to breathe externally. That means cleaning house, energetically, emotionally, practically. Sometimes, this looks like changing your environment. Sometimes it means leaving a conversation mid-sentence because you realize it's no longer aligned. Sometimes it means looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, I release the version of me who needed that fear to feel safe. And then you mean it. You stop rehearsing that fear. You stop making space for it at the table. This process might feel like loss, but it's actually liberation. You're not losing your identity, you're making space for your original one. The self who doesn't have to manage contradiction. The self who no longer tolerates what drains. The self who acts, speaks, and creates not from memory, but from the end. And yes, there will be silence. Spaces between what has fallen away and what has yet to arrive. But don't panic. That space is sacred. It's the womb of your next reality. Don't rush to fill it with noise. Let it be empty for a moment. Let the old echo its last, because only in that stillness can the new begin to settle in. You might notice that things that once triggered you no longer get a rise, that certain conversations fall flat, that people expect reactions you no longer offer. This isn't detachment, it's evolution. You're no longer addicted to emotional turbulence. You're no longer available for identity maintenance based on who you were. You've shifted, and the world will learn that soon enough. And perhaps most importantly, you no longer negotiate with what doesn't match your chosen state. You stop asking, how can I make this fit? And instead declare, if it doesn't fit, it's not mine. That level of clarity sharpens your field. It removes distortion. It invites alignment not just mentally, but materially. This is the cost of becoming, the willingness to let go of what once defined you in order to become who you already are. It's not always comfortable, but it is clean. You leave behind what cannot follow not because you're better, but because you're different now. You're living from the end, and the end does not need to drag the beginning with it. What you're feeling is not destruction, it's reordering. And in that reordering, you begin to experience a lighter way of being. You no longer feel the need to control everything, because you trust what you've become. You've stopped proving. You've stopped compensating. You've stopped explaining your process to people who were never meant to understand it. This is what freedom feels like. Not absence of challenge, but absence of conflict with yourself. You've stopped resisting your own evolution. And in doing so, you've made peace with the truth that not everything is meant to be carried. Not every identity, not every relationship, not every idea of who you were supposed to be. Let it fall. Let it dissolve. Let it rot if it must. Because what remains, what endures beyond the break, is the self you've always known, quietly waiting beneath the noise. And that self is ready now. It's tempting to think of miracles as exceptions, rare events dropped into the world by unseen forces, beyond our control, granted only to the lucky or the faithful. But this view keeps you powerless. It keeps you waiting. It paints life as arbitrary and the divine as unpredictable. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Miracles aren't random. They're responsive. They don't arrive as rewards, they unfold as reflections. Not of begging, but of belief. Not of ritual, but of resonance. And once you begin to live from the end consistently, steadily, without emotional leakage, you realize that what seemed magical from the outside is simply law operating without interference. The miraculous isn't a violation of reality. It's what happens when reality is no longer blocked by contradiction. When you stop trying to manifest from lack, when you no longer toggle between desire and doubt, when your thoughts, emotions, and actions are all telling the same truth, then life moves with speed. Not because you finally earned it, but because you finally stopped arguing with it. This is not superstition, it's congruence. The universal laws of mind don't play favorites, they play frequencies. And when your frequency stabilizes in the end state, when the version of you who has becomes more emotionally dominant than the one who hopes life must conform, it has no choice. Because it is following your lead, not deciding your fate. You've likely felt it before, those moments where everything seemed to sink. You weren't trying harder, you were simply clearer. You weren't anxious, you were present. You stopped needing and started knowing. And suddenly, things moved. The call came, the door opened, the person appeared. Not because you forced it, but because you became undeniable. Now the question is, are you willing to live from that place on purpose? Not just when it's easy, not just when the outer reflects it back, but in the silence, in the gap, in the invisible. That's where miracles are born, not from desperate cries for proof, but from unwavering alignment with the version of you who no longer doubts. To dwell in the end is to become the walking embodiment of the answered prayer. It is to cease asking and start receiving internally first, externally in due course. It's the courage to let go of the struggle, the grind, the proving, and to replace them with steadiness, with trust, with quiet authority. This is where miracles stop being events and start becoming your atmosphere, not because you figured out a secret, but because you finally stopped leaking energy into misalignment. You accepted the truth. Reality bends to coherence. And coherence isn't just about thinking the right thoughts. It's about being the right vibration, saying yes only to what matches, saying no to everything that dilutes, waking up as the one who already is, and treating every conversation, every action, every breath as a confirmation, not a request. You might wonder, how can I know if I'm aligned? You don't need to check constantly. You'll feel it. You'll notice when your choices are clean, when your words don't need defending, when your energy doesn't waver around people who once intimidated you, when you stop explaining your vision and start embodying it so clearly that no one needs the explanation. And when you do that long enough, life will move, sometimes subtly, sometimes all at once, but always in proportion to your consistency. That's what most people miss. They think the miracle is in the method, but the method is meaningless without consistency. One moment of clarity can open a door, but sustained clarity, that's what makes the whole structure shift. This is not about perfection, it's about dominance. Which version of you is running the show most of the time? The one who lives in the end? Or the one who's still watching the horizon, hoping it'll arrive? You don't need to get rid of every doubt. You just need to stop building your identity around it. You don't need to prove you're worthy. You just need to stop negotiating with the version of you who isn't. Miracles are not mystery. They are feedback. They are life's way of saying, I see who you've decided to be. And the moment you stop hesitating, the moment you move like it's done, life doesn't resist. It responds. So move now, not with force, but with precision. Let your words be clean. Let your choices be quiet. Affirmations of the end already lived. Let your energy speak louder than your strategy. And when the shift arrives, when the form finally matches the state, don't be surprised. You've been living it long before it ever showed up. There's a quiet realization that comes near the end of every journey, not the physical one, but the inner one. The realization that the destination you were striving toward, the life you imagined, the version of yourself you worked so hard to become, was never far. It was never waiting at the end of effort. It was always inside, quietly calling you back to what you already were. The longer you dwell in the end, the clearer it becomes. You weren't creating something from nothing. You were uncovering what had been buried beneath doubt, distraction, and delay. You weren't building a new identity. You were remembering the one that never needed fixing. This is the truth that sits beneath all the teachings from Emmet Fox to Neville Goddard, from Troward to Connie Mendez. The divine doesn't give you fulfillment as a reward. It awakens it as a recognition. And that recognition comes not through striving, but through resonance. You live it because it's already yours. You embody it because it's already you. All this time, you thought you had to earn the end. You thought you had to negotiate your worth, convince life to give you permission, convince others to see your value. But none of that was real. The only negotiation happening was the one between you and the past, the version of you that still needed proof, the self that didn't know how to stop seeking. But now, you've stopped. Not because you gave up, because you got it. Because the chase dissolved, because the mirage of distance disappeared, and in its place, calm, a knowing, a stability that cannot be forced and cannot be explained to those who haven't lived it. This is what it means to dwell in the end. It's not a trick, it's not a technique. It's the spiritual maturity to stop leaking your energy into timelines that never served you, to stop offering your presence to scenarios that keep you small, to stop arguing with life about what you're allowed to become, and simply become it. And when you live from that place long enough, something beautiful happens. You start seeing the world not as a field of obstacles to overcome, but as a mirror to refine you. You stop asking, when will it come? And start walking as though it already has. Because it has. Because it was never separate. Even the breakdowns begin to look different. The delays lose their grip. The rejections become clear signals that anything not matching your end is being cleared mercifully, precisely, even lovingly. You now see what others don't, that the outer world has no choice but to adjust. Not because you demand it, but because you've stopped compromising with anything less. You don't shout your arrival. You don't plead for recognition. You carry it. And that weight, that frequency is impossible to fake. There is nothing passive about this clarity. It is quiet power, the kind that doesn't fluctuate with circumstances, the kind that isn't destabilized by noise, the kind that doesn't chase applause, but commands attention by simply being. And when people ask you how you did it, how you got here, you'll smile. Not because there's a secret to tell, but because there isn't. The only secret was consistency. The only method was congruence. The only leap was the one you finally stopped waiting to take. Now the world catches up. Now the pieces fall in. Not as miracles, but as inevitabilities. Not because you mastered some technique, but because you became the one who no longer questioned the truth. This is arrival. And it's not a peak, it's a remembering. You didn't arrive at heaven. You remembered that it was within you all along. Take a moment now not to reflect with effort, but to settle. Let your breath slow, not to search for answers, but because you already feel the shift. You've just walked through a remembering, a dismantling of the myths that said you needed to earn your arrival, wait for proof, or stay small until the world approved. That story is over. Not because you've abandoned discipline or intention, but because you've chosen to live from completion, not toward it. Now, the tone of your life changes. Not just your goals, but your ground. You no longer need to push to feel progress. You no longer confuse urgency with power. You no longer ask permission to stand in the fullness of your chosen self. And when you rise tomorrow, whether the world has changed or not, you have. You've moved from the timeline of seeking to the timeline of remembering. You've become someone who no longer negotiates with doubt, no longer reacts to contradiction, no longer reverts to the chase. What comes next will not surprise you. because it will feel familiar. It will feel earned not by struggle, but by inner precision, by your decision to stay in resonance long enough for life to catch up. Rest now not because the work is done, but because you've remembered that it was never really work. It was alignment. And alignment, once stabilized, requires no force. You are home. And you are the one who built it within.